Ian Bickerton, thanks for your time.
You're very welcome, Scott.
What got you interested at looking at the long-term consequences of war, looking 25 years beyond?
I think what prompted me grew out of the book I did with Ken Hagen some years ago on the unintended consequences, which dealt with the fact that wars produced results that weren't intended. And then I thought to myself, well, if we look along further and take a generational view, what would be the conclusions we'd find? What would we find if we looked a generation later? And it's remarkable because not only do wars not produce the results that people expect, the results they do produce don't last beyond a very short time. And so it occurred to me that wars don't really achieve either their goals, or their short-term goals, or their long-term goals.
And yet the popular perception is that it's easily defined between the victors and the vanquished when it comes to war, with sayings such as, to the victor goes the spoils. That's not the case?
Well, if you ask what the spoils are intended to be, for example, a change of borders or a change of ruler, borders are constantly in dispute and rarely ever remain as settled at the end of a war. And if you look even at World War II, at the end of World War II, what did the victors hope to achieve? Well, they hoped to liberate Europe, and they ended up with replacing one dictatorship or one repressive regime with another in the East, at least. The British lost their empire. The French lost their empire. The Dutch lost their empires in the space of 25 years after the war. So the victors have lost what they fought to retain. And the United States expected stability, expected prosperity. They quickly found themselves engaged in a proxy war, which we call the Cold War, with the Soviet Union. Very shortly after, they're in a war in Korea, and then later in Vietnam. This is not what they hoped or intended at the end of World War II. China, Chiang Kai-shek, victorious in the war, gets defeated within 3 years by the communist, Mao Zedong, and that regime collapses. And the Russians, who hope to secure Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe, end up with a repressive regime which they have to impose upon Eastern Europe. So none of the victors achieved their goals over a 25-year period or even longer.
You mentioned in the book there are two kinds of victory, that which occurs on the battlefield and strategic victory. What's the difference between those two, and where do they intersect, even collide?
Well, they intersect in this respect, that the battlefield victory is simply the end of the fighting. One side decides it will no longer continue to fight. And so then the strategic victory is determining stability and longevity. Peace has no meaning at all if within 5 years or 3 or 5 or 25 years you are fighting again. You haven't achieved stability. Victory depends upon durability of peace or of non-confrontation, non-violence. And so that's the strategic victory. Now that rarely is ever achieved. So these questions of victory have not been very well explored by historians or by military strategists, other than the end of fighting. It's the kind of George W. Bush statement on the USS Lincoln. Military activities in Iraq have ended. We have prevailed. Well, the United States hadn't prevailed in terms of victory, and still hasn't in terms of stability and so on in Iraq.
To use your time frame, 25 years from now, how do you think we will look back upon the current conflicts we're in, presuming they're over? What will we think we've won? What will we determine we've lost?
Well, we're redefining victory these days, not by symbolic gestures the way we ended World War I or World War II, whether it's in Europe or in Japan on the USS Missouri and so on, but by simply withdrawing, by handing over authority and control to another party and saying, well, we've done our job and we're now withdrawing. So we're defining victory now as withdrawal. In the old days, that used to be called defeat, but we never get defeated, so we can't define victory as defeat. So victory is now withdrawal. And that raises a real problem. If victory is indistinguishable from withdrawal, what were we fighting for in the first place? Why did we go in only to withdraw and hand over to somebody and say, well, we've achieved our objective? What was our objective? To hand over to Freddie, who we now claim to be our close friend, an ally and a Democrat, and he or she has no interest in what we think democracy represents to them. How does that represent victory? So we will simply withdraw from Afghanistan, and as we have from Iraq, and we will say the victory is, our job has been done, victory has been achieved, and nothing will have changed, and nothing will have been achieved. And so the best thing that will come out of this is hopefully our people will say, well, if this is victory, it's not worth it. Let's not go in and fight a war in the first place.
Now, if victory is so hard to define, and the costs of victory are so high and the benefits so negligible, why are wars still fought?
There must be some kind of confluence of social Darwinism in which a force is necessary to discipline an individual and groups, and that it is effective in doing this and creating people to bend to your will. And so I think that's an important ingredient in it, a kind of hangover from that sort of post-Darwinian, Turnerian masculine notion that strength is victory and victory is strength, as opposed to a willingness to recognise that life is more complex than that, and we might need to look at many aspects and many avenues in negotiating and dealing with people, rather than that simplistic, we will teach you a lesson approach, which I think, and we also, I think, have been caught up in the notion that our leaders somehow are wiser than we are, that they're demigods, to use the American phrase about their founding fathers, these demigods who are more information than we have, more intelligent, more aware, and therefore we should trust them in their decisions about matters of state. Our leaders are no more wise and no more aware or intelligent than we are, and we should recognise that, and they are making decisions on very often very flimsy evidence, and we should question and question and question and challenge.
Yet if the leaders do say, let's go to war, why is it that the vast bulk of the public still goes along with it?
Well, I think because they've been brought up to believe that it is a courageous and a patriotic thing to do to serve your country. And I think it is a courageous and patriotic thing to do to serve your country. I don't think that's the best way of serving the country. That's my argument, that we need to redefine courage and patriotism in terms of civic actions rather than military actions. For example, we should erect memorials to those who gave their lives fighting in the bushfires of Victoria or the floods of Queensland. But if we could encourage in our culture, our society, the belief that the best way to express our Australianness or our national identity was through the acts of courage which were civilian and civic in nature rather than military, we would have less willingness to go to war.
Professor Ian Bickerton, thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome, Scott.